Sorry about that, guys. Got distracted for a moment. So, let's turn down the music first. There we go. So, yeah, as I said, I picked the best times to stream. But whatever. Today's hopefully pretty easy in comparison to some of the crap I've done in the past. And of course, I always say that, and then spend hours working on whatever. But today should be a more fun, laid back, kind of do what we want kind of day. If only because my house is still reeking of paint thinner fumes. I did a little bit of work on some of my cabinets. I'm refacing my cabinets at home while I have the time off. And the problem is that there's not much wind going on right now. So even with every window in my house open right now, it still reeks of paint thinner. And if I go over into the kitchen, lovely enough, wood sawdust as well. So we'll see how long that lasts. But yeah, today should be nice and easy. I bought some art assets, right? Easiest thing, cheapest thing to do when it comes to getting assets is straight up buying art assets from an artist who has already generated these. Specifically, I went to Biomes because their style meshes what I think this game should look like in the end. And I'm not really sure if all of these are gonna work out or not, but I figured it was worth an experiment just to kind of poke at it and make sure that the game maybe could improve off of having some better art assets. Like I said, we'll see if that's actually the case, but it's worth a shot. Of course, I have to find the actual file that I downloaded. It's here somewhere, I swear, because I see my other downloads. Here it is. So, models and textures. The only worry is that because these guys build all their stuff in Maya, that I'm going to have to find some way to load it into Blender and then convert it to an OGEX file, because that's what the engine includes. Because you'll see they have this like Maya swatches thing, which is cute, but I honestly have no idea if this is something that will be too terribly helpful or not, but we'll find out. Yeah, step one is whether or not Blender can, I didn't even think about this, Blender can import an FBX file. It should be able to. I can't think of reasons why it wouldn't be able to, but I've also not had the greatest experience with Blender. Sometimes I'll find that files that when moved to Blender from other programs, they very frequently have trouble. So we'll see how well this goes. Specifically, the big thing I want to do first is my old crappy trees, and let's pull up how the game looks right now, just so you guys can get a sense of what I'm going for. These trees look like crap, right? They just kind of do. They're basic, like, 3 cones on a cylinder. And, yeah, it kind of matches everything else, but that's because the rest of our art style is pretty ugly, too. And, in fact, maybe we should go about fixing some of this other stuff that's going to affect our gameplay first. I'm kind of tempted to switch tasks on you guys at the last second. But the big thing here is that we've got all this terrain, we've got all this flat space, and we want to spice it up a little bit, just so that it's not so incredibly boring. Whether that means slapping textures on things, or whether that means actually getting like some sense of you know, better 3D models in here. I'm not quite sure yet. I honestly would just like to kind of try and see what I can get in. And if we can't get anything too easy patched in real quick, the other thing I'm noticing is that we do need to get rid of these cliffs, at bare minimum, at some point, for the sake of gameplay. So, let's poke at the art first before I do that. You know what? Gameplay comes first. Gameplay should always come first. In fact, that's kind of something I need to always keep in mind if I can. So, fixing, or not fixing, but normalizing cliffs, normalizing height differences. what's the wording I'm looking for here? No. Blending terrain. Blending biomes. There we go. Yeah. Now that task text is huge. Oh god, and it's only getting bigger. Oh lord. Undo! Undo! I cannot win. There we go. Is that better? That looks better. Looks a bit better. We'll see if that holds out. I can't win. Alright, so gameplay first. Blending the biomes. What we need to do, and this is going to be a somewhat painful thing to do, is that every biome square needs to take the average of all the biomes around it, and we're going to create essentially an average biome, and then we're going to take all the biomes we averaged and blend them together so that our height differences aren't this like cliff that you see right here. It should never go forest, 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 mountains, 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 forest, forest, forest. It shouldn't do that pretty much like any time ever. It shouldn't. Because you'll see it not only does that on this side, it does it back here too. Actually, my map's pretty small right now. Let's turn up the map size for my own sanity's sake. Oh, that's why it's so tiny. I made a change recently that allows me to have large terrain. Unfortunately, the rendering system doesn't have the proper optimizations all in place. So even though I can have huge amounts of terrain now, it starts to really kill the frame rate the moment I start messing with it too much. So you'll notice we've got this like pretty much completely enclosed area. It's got all the data we want, and I mean, it's all right, but this cliff is just pain right there. And the reason that this edge here isn't quite so bad is because the forest and plains have somewhat similar biome information. Excuse me, I have a bug flying around. The plains is a very flat, very simple biome. Forests is also fairly simple in comparison. It can't go too terribly high or too terribly low. Its range is pretty mediocre. And then mountains are this really weird biome where the minimum is actually the ground level. You can never have water living in the mountain biome at the moment just because of the height. And then because its minimum is so high and its max height is also so high that it immediately jumps in height because our multiplier is the only thing that changes. And what we need to do is have our multiplier ramp upwards. So. It's not in the controllers. It might be somewhere in any of these files. I'm going to move the cell to the outermost. So you have the game world that calls into the world generator, and that calls into our cell. That's kind of the way it goes right now. It's just A to B to C. So when we create a cell, I guess step one is where do we set the elevation? Elevation equals. Obviously there's a bunch of space. Here it is. Okay, so we have this get terrain height. And this is what determines our function's terrain height. And you'll notice I've done this in a functional style. I didn't really feel like we wanted anyone else to have access to this function. I want everyone else to, if they need to check height, just check the height of a cell, not check anything else that's crazy. So, okay, this stuff is pretty obvious, right? It gets the biome, it gets the minimum and maximum height, it then gets a bit of noise that matches a very simple scheme. And once it's got that noise, it then proceeds to move it from a -1 to 1 range to a 0 to 2 range, and then cut it in half so it goes between 0 and 1. And once you're at a 0 to 1, it's really easy for us to just say, okay, we're gonna, whoops, move things around in code. We're going to manipulate 0 to be whatever our minimum height is, and we're going to manipulate 1 to be whatever our maximum height is. Very simple stuff. And then I do this quick poor man's fmod in here just to stabilize some of our heights, because without this, we don't end up with much usable terrain, right? If I turn this off, you'll see that our terrain is kind of all over the place, which is kind of cool looking, but also kind of completely useless in terms of like game terrain, right? You can't ever place anything down on any of this terrain, at least not easily. Like even Minecraft says we poor man fmod, or we use an fmod to set everything at a certain height, so it's a 1 block square. That is your like minimum change per square. So yeah, we kind of get garbage if we leave this on. It's kind of cool looking garbage, but it's still garbage at the end of the day, and that's not really what we want. We want something more usable. I do wish I could have a little more height differential, but gosh, it becomes really difficult to do that. The only thought would be when you put a building down that it would take the building, or it would take the center square where you're trying to put it down and maybe flatten out all the terrain around it. Something to keep in mind. Something to definitely keep in mind, but not something I think we're going to end up going for, if only because this terrain is a lot easier to use, right? It's not nearly as interesting, but it's easier for us to use, and that's something that matters a lot to us. So, what we need to do is not just get the terrain height of our current terrain, we need to grab all the biomes of everyone around us, which is difficult because get terrain height is not within the cell system. It's within this like nebulous function that doesn't have a home. So what I think I am going to do, let's see, the cell gets its own terrain height. It says this is my terrain height. What I am tempted to do, because we need access to this cell array, we need access to everybody around us so that we can determine what our biomes are going to look like. So, it's funny, I had the entire art thing set up and I was ready to do all this art, and then I'm looking at it and just like, God, there's gameplay stuff that needs to get done though. So now I'm completely just no script. We're just doing this. Apply cell elevation. No, I don't like that wording. Set cell elevation. Just a function to do it all at once, I think might be best. Okie dokes. So, shared vertices, create terrain mesh group. Wow. Okay, no. Never mind. This stuff is all down here. Here's our create terrain mesh group. None of this stuff is in order anymore. I might have to do a little cleanup on it later. Get cell indices. Okay, that one is there. And then we have this like get cell function, which I think honestly should not be here. It looks like it should be somewhere else. Where's our get cell function? Okay, it's below. Oh, I see. Okay, below constructor. Above some of this other stuff, though. There we go. That should put it in a more manageable space for us. I try and keep my header files and source files to match. So you'll notice these 3 files are in a row, or these 3 functions, I should say, are in a row. And so that means that we're then going to go through and say, okay, well, you know, constructor pretty much always comes first. But after constructor, here's our get cell indices. And then, actually, whoops. This should actually come after the create terrain mesh group. But I just try and keep things in the same order. So if you're looking for it in a file and you happen to have the header file open, you just kind of go, okay, it's going to be after this thing. So even if you're too lazy to even like Control F, you can just scroll wheel to it and you'll find it fairly easily. So what we're going to do, let's see here. First off, we need a constant that says what our biome, let's see, I don't want to call it interpolation, even though that is what it is. Our biome interp depth. And we'll just set it to like 2 for now, just to keep this from getting too out of control. See what I did there? 2 out of control. Bad puns. Sorry. So we are going to, for each cell array count, for each cell in the array, we're going to get the cell's x index. I'm still unsure of what style I like more. So recently I've started playing with another new style in my programming where I use underscores to space things out and delineate variables a little further, make it more readable. Underscores are kind of like spaces to me now, and I'm trying that out. I'm not really sure if it's working or not. I mod cell array side count and cell y index. It kind of does, I like how it spaces it out and makes it a little more readable in one sense. But I'm still not sure I'm completely sold on it yet. It's purely stylistic, but at the same time, it's a style I'm fighting with, because I'm still used to camel casing everything. And I don't know if that ends up being something I'm a fan of or not. Anyway, so first we're going to, so we've got our for loop for every cell. Now for every cell, we need to grab a block of cells and add them all together. Yeah. And then make sure that our, let's see here, x start is going to be the cell x index minus the biome interpolation depth. And then we need to make sure that we don't walk off the end of our, we don't walk off of the end of our array either. And also we got to make sure that even though we have a one-dimensional array, we're treating the array like a two-dimensional array. And so what that means is, because we're treating it like a two-dimensional array, we need to make sure that we don't walk off any of these edges either. So it's not just that we stay within the one-dimensional array and don't walk off of our ends on each side, but we also need to make sure that we have this block of memory. We don't walk off of any of the sides of it either. Da-dum-dum. And Nomad Studios, I'm sorry for the slow response, but good evening. Things are going well. We are making progress. So let's see here. We're going to take the maximum, either 0 or the cell index minus the interpolation depth. And then our end is going to be the minimum of... I'm doing this in the wrong order, I'm sorry. Usually when you do minimum and maximum functions, you put the calculated value first, and any fixed numbers second. It's like saying, oh, what's the term? I think I've heard it called Yoda conditionals, where instead of saying, if x equals 1, people do this weird if 1 equals x. And because of the phrasing, they call it a Yoda conditional. And those are definitely annoying, because you're not sure what you're looking at until you realize there's a variable in the conditional later on. And that gets really bizarre. So let's see. We want to lock ourselves to the cell array side count -1. There we go. So x goes from x start to x is less than x end plus x. There's a lot of crazy stuff in there, but that's okay. Yeah, Yoda conditionals are like on the list of like funny little programmer in jokes. For example, there is a data type called a nibble, which is half of a byte. It's 4 bits. And it's something you only hear from programmers. Nobody else talks about nibbles, right? Like, a manufacturer does not care how many mega nibbles you happen to have. You have to say that one carefully, too. It can very quickly turn into dirty things. But that's another, like, programming in joke you won't hear in many other places, is the idea of a nibble. Because it's just so bizarre, right? When would you ever care about 4 bits unless you're inside of a bit field? Like, okay, if you're in a bit field or if you're serializing binary data, fine. You care about exactly how many bytes you're reading in at a time. But nobody is going to look at that and say, huh, you know what that looks like? That looks like an unsigned nibble, right? No, it's an unsigned, oh god. Like, why would you ever do this? You should not really need a value that can go from... It doesn't even go to... What? A byte is 8 bits, right? I don't even... Now I'm curious. What's 2 to the 4? 16. So it's a number that can go from 0 to 16. I don't know the use of that. At least a byte goes to 256. Also, I did these in the wrong order. Also, I keep typing the wrong letter. Let's just swap these real quick-alike. There we go. So the reason I put y first and then x on the inside is so that when we iterate through our array, we do so top to bottom, left to right, the same way that you and I would read a book or the compiler reads code. There's no specific, like, profiling or performance or any other reason than the fact that that's how I like to walk through things, is left to right, top to bottom. It makes it a little more obvious to me just what the hell's going on. Because remember, the inner loop is going to spin, and then you do the outer loop once, and then the inner loop's going to spin a bunch, and then the outer loop is going to spin once. So you end up with, you spin across the x's on one line of y, and then you hit the y outer loop and reset yourself like a typewriter to the beginning of the next line, and then that 4x spins to the end, and then you hit that y, and now you're down here writing. Simple, easy stuff. Let's see, the other thing we need to do here is an int array. Here's our biome counter. And this sucker, k biome count. I really wish I could just set these all to 0 like that. I know that's not actually the case. It looks like I'm setting 1 to 0. I'm actually kind of curious what ends up happening here. I'm going to leave that breakpoint there and hopefully remember, like... actually, I'm just going to put, like, a fix me and say, does this work? Question mark, crazy face. Like, I have no idea if that actually will work or not, to initialize all of them to 0. I don't think it will. I think it will initialize the first element to 0 and then leave the rest as garbage. Okay, so we've got all of our cells, and we're going to assume at this point that all of our cells have been mostly initialized. So what we need to do is say, let's see, our biome counter So first we need to figure out what biome the cell we are staring at is. So we grab the cell pointer, which is going to be y times the cell array side count plus x. And now we've got the cell pointer, and we say let's see, how do I do this? It's the biome counter biome plus plus. There we go. Moldy Moss is asking whether I stream every other day or just when I have time. Unfortunately, my life is in flux yet again with this whole losing my job thing. So it's a little difficult to pin down times. At bare minimum, I try and stream for a couple hours on Wednesday and a couple hours on Saturday. And then I kind of, all the in-betweens are just when I can manage it, unfortunately. Once I have my job yet again, starting, I think, the second week of March, I will iron out a much more solid, straightforward schedule. For now, though, the only days I can really commit to are Wednesdays and Saturdays. It's just kind of the way the world works at the moment. I'm trying to stream as often as I can, but as I said, I've got a lot of stuff to get done in the meantime before the new job kicks in. I'm doing a lot of work on my house. I need to make sure my car is running. I've got a dentist appointment tomorrow morning. That's the one you should feel sorry about. Ugh, I hate dentists. Just gotta get my teeth cleaned, but I still dread it every time. Anyway, I shouldn't be blathering. And I wouldn't worry about it. The job loss was a fantastic opportunity for me, and I absolutely love the fact that I lost my job, which is not something you'll hear out of too many people's mouths. But it's giving me a lot of free time, so I can do a lot of my own game development, which I am loving. Absolutely loving. Okay, so we've got all the biomes totaled up in the area. The other thing that we need to do is we need to, let's see here. I just realized that this, can this exist out here? It actually can, because it's just going to get refilled every single time. That's an interesting thought. So I realized I put this biome counter in the most outer, it's not even inside a loop, right? It just kind of exists. I could put it, I of course did not put it there. I could put it here, but the more I think about that, the more I realize that might be a bad idea, if only because this is an array of information that to initialize it and empty it every single time, no, we need this inside here, because if we keep it, if we don't keep reinitializing everything to 0, we're going to have garbage data left behind, and we don't want that. So, never mind, bad idea. I am going to put this in here. Also, at the very end, we need to figure out, let's see, so we've got all the biomes kind of totaled up inside this array. So everything this makes use of is inside here. So the only question left is how do we take this information into consideration when we set the cell's elevation? Oh, this is braid music. No wonder. I was like, this is familiar stuff. I was wondering how it was so familiar. It's because I heard it 1,000,001 times while I was porting braid. Lovely, lovely game, by the way. I know it's nearly impossible to find source code for things, but God, that was some gorgeous source code. Jonathan Blow writes some really pretty and pretty hilarious stuff as well. So, let's see here. For loop, we go through, we say, okay, we now have all the biome counters put together, and we need to find the average of all of these. So what we're going to do, here we go. So we're going to take our min height, and start this sucker off at 0. And the max height also goes to 0. And I'm kind of thinking that instead of just having this biome counter out here, we can actually use these. Let's see if I'm right. So if I put these out here, instead of having a biome counter, what we can do is we go into the data handler and we say get the biome information container for the cell biome. Right? So we have this biome info container pointer that looks like that. We take our minimum height, biome info get min height, simple enough. And we do the same thing for the maximum height. So now we have minimum and maximum height getting added in, so it just accumulates inside of this variable. So the last step is we say the cell minimum height is going to be equal to, actually, we can just use a better operator. Divide, come on, there we go. We're going to divide it by the total number of cells that we just iterated over, which is going to be, see, okay, old style, new style. I don't know which of these is better. I'm still trying to puzzle that out, or I'm just at least trying to puzzle out which one I like more. Camel case is kind of the current go-to in the industry. Everybody uses camel case. I've only seen a rare number of programmers who use this underscore kind of delimiting within the same variable name. Still unsure. We'll see if this gets any better or not. So we'll say it's the xend minus the xstart times the yend minus the y start. There we go. This should give us the number of cells we just iterated over. Cell max height. So this will do one thing. This will break if we have a stupidly small terrain size, ever. The moment the biome interpolation depth overruns the actual size of the terrain, we'll start seeing divide by 0. Or, sorry, no. If the terrain ever becomes smaller than a certain size, we'll start seeing divide by... No, we'll actually never see divide by 0 unless there's no terrain, which would be stupid. So never mind. There's no problem with this. I was trying to think of divide by... like, if this would ever run into a divide by 0 issue, but as long as terrain exists, then that terrain's elevation should never really be a problem. Final step. Let's see here. I do that a lot. I think of, so something you'll find that a lot of experienced programmers do. They run through error cases in their head as things go on. Whenever I type a divide, you'll see me sit there a moment and go, okay, can this ever cause a divide by 0 error? It's just nature for me at this point to look at division operators and go, can this create an error case? And it's just so ingrained in my head, unfortunately, that it does drive some people nuts when I do such a thing. But that is kind of the nature of how this works. You write code, and if you don't sit here and kind of, I don't know, proofread as you go, you end up with even more errors than you see me run into, which is somewhat frightening. So, biome counter, yada yada, we go through, we now have our minimum and maximum height. So now it's not dependent on that single biome anymore, it's now dependent on a small area of biomes around it. The only thing left, ooh, and I like this better, This should be a constant reference to an offset. And then position is based on cell. So we finally have to get our current cell. Right? Yeah. Finally have to grab a cell pointer. And what we want to do is we want to say, it's not just position, but it's cell get center. Yeah, probably center. It honestly doesn't matter a ton what point we use, because the noise is still going to be somewhat uniform across all of this. So it's not actually the end of the world. I'm just going to do a quick point 2D. That's going to be our final, we'll call it the noise position. And we'll say it's the center plus the offset. Saves us a little, no, it doesn't save us any processing. It just makes it a little cleaner, I guess. Get terrain height modifier not found. That's fine. We do need to set elevation to something. Elevation 0. That should be fine. And what we are going to do, somewhere inside the cell system, when we actually generate all of our cells, and we generate all the neighbor information, the final step, I want to call it a final step. I don't actually know this. Yeah, this. Let's put it in before we set neighbors. I don't know. It doesn't really matter a ton. I'm obsessing over something very, very minor. This is our noise offset. Let's be a little more specific with this. Set cell elevations. And right now, we're not using an offset, if only because we don't want our terrain to be randomized while we're doing basic debugging stuff. The moment we can turn debug mode off, or the moment we want to stop debugging the terrain, yeah, sure, we can have random values flying. In fact, we should, because when our random values are 0, we aren't testing anything, aside from a base case. So we want to make sure that eventually we unlock this, but I just want the feature in place, and then we can fight with it later. So you are the noise offset, and I need to make sure you end up there. Biome counter, right. Don't need that sucker anymore. Anything else? Nothing else. Okay. Fingers crossed. Here we go. This is always kind of that moment of truth, because it just broke. Does this ever not happen? I can't think of the number of times I've started this up and it's just been like, nope, this doesn't work. I cannot count the number of times that has happened. So let's look real quick inside, because this has got to get called, right? And are we doing, the other question is, are we doing anything inside the cell constructor that expects our, okay, that expects our elevation to be set? So specifically, by the time this gets called, I actually should probably keep an eye on this just to double check. So our constructor gets called, we set all our variables, and okay, no, there is absolutely nothing else that goes on that we care about. So, okay, from 0 to 8100, wow, that's a lot of cells. There's our X and Y. Obviously, we start at 0, 0. Let's see here. Just double check my math here. So, when we hit 90, cell number 90 will return 1, and that will be our first index, and 90 will return 0 here. Yeah, okay, so our cell X and Y look fine. Obviously, our start cell minus, cell plus. Here's our array count -1, which means we're going to go from 0 to 2. Because we're in a corner, right? We can't go -2. So we're stuck at our center position, but we're going over by a couple. And we're doing the same on this Y side. So our Y start is 0, our Y end is still 2. That makes sense. I haven't mucked up any of these. This is still Y times the cell array side plus X. Yes. We have loaded in, so this is a question. Have we loaded in the biome information at this point? It looks like we have. So that's not a problem either. And we tested 4 cells. So our minimum height, which is -4, is going to get averaged out to -1. Same with the max height. We grab the cell whose index is our current array. Good. And you'll notice like a lot of the information isn't filled in yet. This is a very, very new piece of information for us. So we get the cell's center, which looks good. There's no offset there. We grab noise based on this noise position. We do the simple math to move it about. Max minus min plus min, yes. And then we do the fmod to bring it in line. Looks good. I don't see anything wrong with this. So the question is, why is it crashing then? And where is it crashing is the other piece of information. It's crashing inside of a delete. For an array delete. Inside a vertex buffer object, which we are filling in somewhere. How would this break? Why would this break? So, this is peculiar. This is really peculiar. What did I miss? What did I not do? Okay, so it looks like we've built the terrain all right, and that there's an issue in the water mesh. That seems bizarre. Let's close these for a moment, just so I can look at my other files. Da-dum-dum-dum. What did I do? What did I do wrong? Unfortunately, that is not the first nor the last time you'll hear me say that. What did we change? And did this break before? So it didn't break before. All we were doing before. Okay, so step 1. Turn off the code, see if it continues to work. Right? We're going to narrow down and figure out what the heck went wrong. So specifically, elevation is getting set to 0 right now. And short of this call inside the cell system, that is calling set cell elevations. So if we turn that off, does it still break? Yes. Okay, so it's not the cell elevation setting that is breaking inside our system. It is interesting Because I also just noticed we're not setting the cell elevation using this. Maybe it's the fact that all of our elevation is at 0. Although I don't think that should cause us any trouble. Let's just... Because if you look at the list of things we've changed, it's pretty freaking small, right? I'm just going to bring up a quick log of everything I've changed, right? So we've got... Okay, we've got the fact that we removed this get terrain height function, and we have stopped setting elevation using that. Okay, that's one change. We've got a new set cell elevation function there, and we're using that function, except we're not using it right now. We're not even dreaming of using it. So the only other change is in the game world, and that's just making the terrain size larger. But we've done that before, right? That didn't break anything. This is bizarre. Oh, you know what? Something I never thought about that is probably... Let's go back to where the crash is, because I think I know what's wrong. The crash is happening. If you look at this loop, inside the water mesh, what we've done is we've created terrain with no water in it. I think I'm telling it to try and build a mesh with no vertices. Because if you look at, look at these vertex count 0, triangle count 0, right? Not good. So, how do we fix that? We just, up here, we say, if the vertex count is still 0, then return. There we go. Never thought about that. Terrain without water. Okay, so this is our terrain with with 0 height change. Cool. Let's go turn the height change stuff back on. Somewhere in my cell function? No, it was somewhere in the cell system. It was cell system constructor. There we go. There. Oh, look at that. I love that so much more. Here, let's just, let's crank the world size for a moment. And first off, this will be a little bit of a stress test, because I haven't done this a ton. And I need to do more stress testing and see just how much this system can take. So we're going to crank the terrain size to 25. Which is not huge, but it's one of the larger sizes I've tried. And if we, let's see. Okay, we're still at 200 frame rate. Oh, I like that so much more. You'll notice that this is never breaking out into an unreachable space. We've still got some pretty crazy cliffs going on here, but all we have to do, if we wanted to, is jump into that set cell elevation function. And if we wanted to even that out a little bit more, we could do something like this, where we say, okay, we're going to interpolate the depth by a certain number, by a larger number specifically. And you'll notice that now we have much more even terrain changes. And that is a lot nicer looking. Gives us a little bit more, I don't know. It's a little more graduated in its up and down. Granted, we do want some cliffs sometimes, but for now, I like that a lot better. To the point where I'm actually tempted to say, I'm noticing there's not much height difference in the forests, and I'm kind of tempted to increase that slightly. I mean, it's just kind of, it's nice, but it's not perfect. But then again, we don't have to get things to perfect, we just have to get them to playable, which is what this does, right? Before, when we had those stupidly huge cliffs, the cliffs caused an issue. You could never cross into that mountainous region for one reason or another. You just couldn't. And now, with this kind of interpolated biome setup, this allows us to have something a little more interesting going on, which is cool. Bartender, thanks for the compliment. The shadows are all system done. They're not me, so I wish I could take credit for those, but sadly I cannot. Jesse, I am not a pro in the way you would think. I don't get paid to do this job, right? That's our definition of professional in the industry. Actually, I guess I am a pro now, aren't I? Starting in a couple weeks, I will have a job in the games industry for not the first time. Well, yeah, no, for the... I don't know if I count my old job as a job in the games industry. Cloud gaming is technically a games industry job. Technically. So I guess, yeah, I've been in the games industry for 3 years, 6 years, 5 years now. 5 years. Excuse me. Alright, so, gameplay fix done, right? I love how I snapped my fingers and the lights turned on. Specifically, the sun came up in the game. And actually, I'm liking the fact that my frame rate's pretty darn good. I'm actually amazed that my frame rate is going quite as well as it currently is. Let's crank the size a little more, just to stress test. Once again, let's make it 50, right? 4 times as much space. And we're gonna do something silly and tell all of our terrain to turn on at once. So there's a... Oh, okay. Now I'm seeing the frame rate drop. Even though it says I'm at 80 frames per second. There's some noticeable jitter here. Huh. I'll need to figure that one out. That's an interesting thing. And the funny thing is, where it's spending a fair hunk of its time is actually out in the shadow mapping system. You can see it flicking between 0.9 to about 1.5 to 2 milliseconds. Which is way too long for any single subsystem to be spending. Probably. Possibly. It's not the end of the world, but it's still taking a while. Bartender, can I say what game I will be working on in my new job, or is it hush hush? So technically, it's a startup in stealth mode. The problem is, it's not that I can't tell you, or it's not that I won't tell you, it's that I can't tell you. I've actually not seen pretty much any of the game at all. It's educational games. That's kind of the most I know. I saw a bunch of notes up on their walls in their meeting rooms. Aside from that, though, I actually have very little idea of what I'll be working on. There is an NDA in place, but it's kind of loose. Because it is my job now, and people are always kind of allowed to talk to some degree about their job, unless they're like in Google X or something crazy like that. I'm going to keep the terrain size at 20 now, just to keep our frame rate stupidly high. So we can see when we create systems and subsystems that kind of break our frame rate significantly. Because frame rates, one thing to keep in mind, the difference between 1200 frames per second and 1100 frames per second is not the same amount of time as 200 and 100 frames per second. Even though they're both 100 frames per second apart, each frame per second, as you get higher and higher in number, your frames are going so incredibly quick that you get to a point where it doesn't actually mean much to lose 20 frames per second if you're running at, say, 2000. Not because you have a lot of time left, but because 20 frames per second when you're at 2000 frames per second is such a short period of time, as opposed to if you're at 60 frames per second and you lose 20 frames per second, that's terrifying right there. That is not something you should be doing on a regular basis. Just kind of a rule of thumb when you're doing stuff like that. So let's see. And kind of the big thing to keep in mind if you're ever making games and you feel the need to profile something or you feel the need to see what your frame rate looks like, don't look at your frame rate. Look at how much time you're spending per frame, because that will give you a better measurement of how much time you have to spare or how many CPU cycles you have to spare. For example, you'll note I'm sitting at about a 3 millisecond frame. Not bad. That's actually really freaking nice. 3 milliseconds, especially when you consider that 60 frames per second, and you'll notice, okay, I click away from the game, and the game's frame rate drops like a rock. I'm up to 40 milliseconds now, which drops me to 25-ish frames per second. That's just because the game's sleeping in the background a fair bit more. Ta-da! Back to 300 frames per second with the click of a mouse. I'm an optimizing pro. We have 16 milliseconds per frame if we want to be at 60 frames per second. So 16 milliseconds is kind of that number we're going to try not to cross. Being at 3 or 3.5 right now, not bad. 3 milliseconds is great. It means we still have another 13 or so to mess with. Granted, as we add more things to the game, the frame rate's just going to naturally drop down because obviously more code is going to be getting run per frame. But if we ever like implement pathfinding and watch it in general drop to about, suddenly, our pathfinding is taking up, 2 milliseconds per frame, that might be something we want to investigate and speed up. I actually recently did a number of speed ups on the system to ensure that our pathfinding is nice and quick, even in worst case scenarios. So now, even if he can't find a way to a point, which, by the way, where'd the little dude go? I guess that's what I get for only having one of them turned on right now. If the system ever detects that you cannot reach your point, I did some work to make sure that it didn't lag for a frame or two, which is kind of nice. Alright, so cool. I'm just going to commit this really quickly. Biome, there we go. Biome interpolation complete feature. Actually, this is a fix. As much as I hate to say it, it's not a new feature. It's just the fact that I made something work. 156. We are at 156 different revisions in our code repository so far. Alright, let's see here. So we've got that in place. Let's look at the art now. I want to do something fun and meaningless. Let's look at that art stuff that I brought up earlier. Let's see. How do I open these? Oh, interesting. What? Visual Studio has an FBX? That I never knew. Oh, this is too cool. Now, obviously this is boring because it's just a quad. But, is there some way to view texturing? Display objects as a wireframe, overdraw, or flat shaded. Okay, that's not going to help me a ton. Advanced. Render it with DirectX. Okay. This is interesting. If only because I never knew Visual Studio had a 5 vertices. Really? Huh. I've never done this before. This is bizarre and really cool, but bizarre. Alright, let's try one of the more interesting ones. Let's try one of the houses. Oh, look at that! And it's got basic flat shading on it, which is kind of what I want. So, huh. Whoa. Now, you'll notice this is not acting like the grass, because, oh, you know what's probably happening? The files are still inside the zip file, so let's uncompress these. 7-zip, extract to a folder, please. Where the heck did they go? I unzipped them and they promptly disappeared. Really? Can I? Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. So let's see here. Play Happy Club. What? 50 guns? I have no idea what you're talking about. Alright, let's look at these models. See what we got, and see what we can kind of mess around with in here. Tile ground. Okay, so we got some tiles. So I bought this art pack from BitGem, because I thought it fit what I liked about the game into a really interesting art style. Yeah, sorry, 50 guns. You say raid, and the only thing that comes to mind is like a World of Warcraft raid, or like a raid set of hard drives set up. So these are pretty, and these are nice, and I like them, and we will see if we can maybe get some of these moved in. The other thing to do, okay, so we've got the ground tiles. Can these, okay, here we go. This is more helpful. Specifically, let's turn off the grid. Okay, so here's all our different types. That I understand a little bit more. So, okay, now we can see what our, or at least hopefully we can see what some of these buildings look like. Here's a house. No? Still no textures? Dang it. I was hoping that the texture system would kind of kick in. Funny that it doesn't. I didn't realize Visual Studio had all this 3D modeling stuff attached to it. That's so incredibly bizarre. But look at that. That's nice and low poly, which is what I want. Oh, and here's our problem. Look at that offset. It should be sitting way the heck over here in the distance. But instead our model is at some bizarre offset. Why is it out there? That is a curiosity. Okay, so Visual Studio's got a somewhat impressive and also somewhat unimpressive set of 3D features that I now know exist. You can subdivide and you can extrude, and that actually is pretty much all you need. As long as you can do that and then figure out how to also attach textures, then you're kind of set, right? That's all you really need. Oh god. Okay, so the problem is it looks like it's having trouble with the atlas texture. What? If they atlas the texture, I might have to unatlas it, which would be a complete pain in the ass. Okay, cool. But we can see all of our objects. We can kind of figure out what we want and where we want them to be. Oh, look at this. This is all very cool. And this did not cost me much. That's the best part. Like, I did not pay a ton of money, and this is a lot of assets that I could use. Specifically, I'm happy about these trees. Okay. Nice to know, 50 guns. You good luck with that? Have fun? I have no idea. Can it do it? Vorska, can it do animations? Oh man, I would be impressed. Granted, so the one thing to notice is that when the camera angle starts to get low, some of these models start to break apart. You can kind of see that they cheated ever so slightly in that some of the nicer, bigger trees look good, but some of these, and I keep trying to mouse wheel zoom, you'll notice some of these trees aren't complete all the way through, or that there's a little bit of edge trouble going on here with these leaves. Not the end of the world. The landscape shader will actually take care of that in the game engine, so that actually will look really nice if we can do this right. I got these assets from BitGem. I'll toss a link into chat because I know me saying it is not the same as tossing a link in here. These guys have some pretty cool stuff, and they're in pretty much any marketplace you can think of. If it's Unreal, if it's Unity, like, they're in a lot of good places to be in terms of asset creation. Okay, so step one, let's open one of these suckers up in Blender, and then if we can open it in Blender, hopefully we'll be able to export it out to something a little more useful for us, specifically the OGX stuff. Downloads, where are you? Oh, downloads, specifically the fantasy set. I want the models. So it's looking for Blender files. I think that's problem number one. We need to probably import. Yeah. And I'm noticing FBX is not in the list. Although I think OBJ files are in here. So that should work. Let's see here. Import. Yeah, so we're going to try importing this as a wavefront, an OBJ file. And we'll kind of go from there. I like how... Okay, so some of our terrain ended up here correctly. Oh god, but it's so huge that it's actually not showing up too terribly well. There's a frustum distance that's clipping on us because these things are so far out. So let's... Did this all come in as a single object? Close. I wonder if I can just scale it down real quick. Really? Okay. As it turns out, you can flatten it into 2D images too. Yeah! That's actually kind of funny. Okay. 0.001. 0.001. Okay, so that's probably going to be a little too small for us. Especially, okay, seriously, cube, GTFO. You're not welcome here anymore. Okay, let's grab all these objects, which there is a lot of them. Whew. Okay, really? Oh, I have to reselect them all? Oh, that's lovely. I can't just... No, I can't just click and drag. Just tried that. Did not work. Can I at least... No. No, I can't. Oh boy. There we go. A is select all. Ta-da! Problem solved. Scale... Twice the size. No, just twice. There we go. Okay. So the key here is making this about the same size as... I like how there's no importer for the OpenGEX format, but there is an exporter. Let's see. Can we open up our tree? Of course, it wants to open it up in a new file. Fine, fine. Import an OBJ file, has all our stuff in it. And now we're going to scale it down. No, not that though. Scale. Really? Would you quit it? Not the tree. Does the tree, like, have leaves or something? Or did I name it trunk or something stupid like that? I may have very well done that. Okay, can we just select all and then deselect? Oh god, I'm on faces. Let's, not edit, object. There we go. .002. There we go. Bringing this. Okay, so here's how it looks in scale with everything else that's in the game right now. You can kind of see the height of the tree, and then see how all this terrain kind of matches up against it. I kind of like that. I'm tempted to make this all a teensy bit smaller, if only because these houses, in comparison to the people we have, are going to be huge, right? They're already like only the height of this tree up to about this first set of branches. So let's actually crank it. Let's try half sizing it first, and then we'll go from there. So in terms of tree height, this might work. Especially when you look at the tree to tree height, if we were to drag all this stuff over here, just so we could purely look at the difference in height between trees, this looks pretty good. So my only real worry left at this point is that we have to export each of these out to their own files and make sure that the UV information persists. We also have to make sure that the vertex coloring that we're doing doesn't mess with anything. And finally, we want to make sure that we're not overloading ourselves with anything stupid, such as if these models have interior edges, we might want to rip some of those out. So if they have faces you can never see, I want to make sure that these are optimized. So the easiest check is just looking underneath, and I'm not seeing any downward facing edges here. So that's a good start. The other thing to check that we can do fairly easily is we can grab one of these, not grab an object specifically, sorry. We should be able to grab the Blender render. And there's a way here to turn on whether or not we're actually viewing textured information. And that is actually something I am somewhat unsure of. It's been a while since I've used Blender, unfortunately. And so the question becomes, how do I view an object's... Because I guess the stuff I'm most interested in right now is, let's say it's this tree. I really like this tree. So the question is, does this have UV maps left? Render active scene. There's no camera. Right. I tore the camera out of the scene. Add camera. And I think, okay, we need to muck with our camera a little bit. If only because it's pointed straight down and it's below our terrain. There we go. Let's get this camera under control a bit. Specifically, rotate. Nope, that's not the rotation I want. Can I want those. There we go. There we go. Render. And we need a light. Of course we forget the lights. Of course we do. Yeah. We forgot the lights. That's fine. We can fix this. I just need to recall how to get out of this view. There we go. It's been a while. Like I said, it's been a while since I've used Blender, so bear with me, folks. I'm really sorry. I'm really rusty with my Blender usages. We're going to tack another light into our scene. Lamp. Sorry, not light, lamp. So sue me. We'll just point light, because I'm lazy. I am really lazy. And let's get us some directional. Oop. There we go. Now I'm not doing this. If I were really, really like pushed for time, what I'd do is you line it up on one axis and then you line it up on a different axis. So usually you do top and front or top and side, and that will give you a good enough approximation of where it is that it shouldn't worry you too much. Light properties, specifically this one. Here's our point light, here's our scale, delta, yada, yada, yada. Should be large enough. Should. We'll see if it actually ends up being large enough or not. Okay, so It looks like we don't have texture data attached to this object, to this tree specifically. What are... Okay, there is a UV map attached to it. Interesting. So if there is a UV map, why aren't you getting drawn? That's a conundrum. If okay, well, let's see. They've got this atlas, so maybe we won't have to de-atlas this whole thing. It might be possible for us to just oh god, can we start up Blender a second time, please? Yes, good. Nuke that. Paste selection from buffer, sure. The only thing I really care about, though, is the fact that this has the most bizarre transformation. Can we reset that? I'd be happy if we could reset that. That looks nice. Oh, except we missed the trunk. Of course we missed the trunk. I always do crazy things like that. Okay, copy. Yes. Oh, interesting. Control tab switches between your, like, recently selected modes. Learned something new today. Okay, you come all the way back here, please. And I'm actually worried enough about this that we're going to try and line it up as best as we can. The other thing we need to do is I need to look up how to I need to look up in Blender how to bake transformation information into the vertices specifically. Just click Control A in object mode. Thanks, Blender. Apply everything. Just like location, rotation, and scale. Cool. So now notice that our axes are centered on the 3D model itself. We can actually take our time to clean this up a little bit more. Specifically, there we go. That looks pretty good. Location. There we go. Okay, so we've got our tree. And I just want to make sure that, okay, it still has UV map information. It looks like everything else survived. Yeah, it looks like everything else survived. We'll see if it exports alright, or if we're just kind of in shit shape at this point. Oh, did not mean to try and duplicate that. Yeah, let's delete that duplicated data, because that's dumb of me to have done. And we don't want lamp and camera in scene for the sake of exporting this. There we go. Just trying to get the camera recentered on it a little bit so I can have an easier time looking at it. OpenGEX, desktop, settlement, import, game, models. I'll call this the BitGem tree for now. We'll actually name it something better when we're done futzing with it. But for now, that is good enough. And the other thing is that we need to make sure... Dang it, somewhere in here is that texture. Question is, where did that texture go? I love how it's got... Oh, there it is. Duh. Land Builder Starter Atlas. Yeah, this is probably that atlas that we need. Okay. C4. We're going to dump that in our import as well. There we go. So let's get that out of here and start the engine up. Whoop, not what I meant to do. New world, where we are going to import a scene. That is our bitgem tree. And look at that. It imported in. It looks alright. We'll see if that ends up being the case. But it looks pretty darn good for now. Obviously, our material is off, and we need to fix that. But first, there we go. We need to get this atlas also loaded in. RGBA color, where A is transparency. Sure, repeat, I guess? That I'm actually not sure about. We also might want to use some block compression on this, because this is a large file. I think it's like 4K by 4K. Don't really want to futz with calculating normal maps and doing any of that right now. We'll probably end up doing it later, but not now. Map levels, not particularly. Bleed colors for the alpha test. We'll figure out the rest of this as we need it. We'll probably have to re-import this more than a few times. And chugga-lugga-lugga. I wonder if there's any limitations on... oh, it's probably because I told it to block compress the file. Oh god. I wonder if there's any limitations, though, in terms of texture importing. Importing a texture. Okay, so on the upside, it does look like it imported well. I'm just going to turn off the block compression. Oh, was it not on? Okay, I'm going to tell it to go again, just in case. Because, oops. Da-dum-dum-dum. Supports TGA files, which may be 8, 16, 24, or 32-bit, with and without compression. Features, yeah. Da-dum-dum. Oh. The output texture... So using the block compression... I'm sorry, guys, I'm going to have to do this again. It says the output texture is stored in a hardware-recognized compression format. This should be turned on for almost all texture maps for best performance and memory usage. So don't mind me, we're just going to block compress it this time, for realsies. Okay, so we've got that. There we go. Let's get this world editor back front and center again. So if I bring up the material, I should now be able to grab our texture. There we are. Oh, look at that. That is a very pretty atlas. They did a great job of compressing all that down. Whee, let's put it on a box. That should be interesting. So this just uses basic texture coordinates. So it should, when we bind this material... Hey, look at that. That doesn't look too bad. Now we need to turn alpha test and some other stuff on. But other than that, like, we're most of the way there. The only thing to obviously keep in mind is that because they used alpha for some of their transparency stuff, we need to jump in here to our flags and say render with an alpha test. There we go. Is there anything else? Screen space occlusion, I should probably look at a bunch of these, double check that they do what I think they do. Specifically, let's see. materials. Flags. Okay, so alpha multi-sample coverage. The value of the alpha channel of the diffuse texture determines the multi-sample coverage mask in the hardware. Using this can help soften the edges of alpha-tested materials when anti-aliasing is enabled. Mission glow, vertex occlusion. Okay. I think I understand what's going on and what we're doing. So, this looks pretty damn sexy, right? Look at that. That is a nice tree. And it did not take us the most effort in the world to get it all attached. So all we should have to do at this point is save this out to a model resource. And just for kicks, this might be a terrible idea, but I'm just going to replace the base tree with it. And model tree save. Yes. Let's see how this goes. So the one thing, ooh, look at that though. The one thing to keep in mind here is that when one part of your art gets updated like this, if everything else begins to fall behind, your game gets into this funny state where assets look out of place, right? These trees look wrong. And not because they look nice, it's because they look too nice. When you compare it to all the other things in the vicinity, you'll notice that we have, like, okay, look at this wireframe count, right? We've got very, very few vertices floating around here. But then, if you look at the trees, it's this tight, dense little bit of terrain. Or, sorry, not of terrain. It's this tight little bunch of vertices. And so it doesn't make sense anymore. Why do you have A and not B? Like, why doesn't our terrain look better? Or why doesn't the rest of this look as nice? And that's kind of a problem in some ways. We've made our objects in the game look so much nicer than some of the surrounding terrain that we kind of ran across this problem where suddenly, oh, the trees look, I would go so far as to say, too nice. Oh, and one more thing I meant to fix. I think I wound, yeah, I definitely wound all my polygons backwards for the topmost mesh. So while I'm thinking about it, we are going to dive into the, let's see here, cell top mesh, top 2 mesh. There we go. Let's wind these backwards, just so that this starts working again. So usually polygon winding would not break, or sorry, polygon winding backwards would break. Oh, wow. No, I'm still having trouble, even though it's wound the other way? That's bizarre. It's only working for some of them? One sec. We've got a problem, Houston. And it is not a great problem at the moment. Materials. Vertex coloring, not two-sided. We're going to export this out so that its changes don't bother anyone else. Is the water double-sided? No. Good. That is how it should be. Okay, so here's a problem that I need to fix. My polygons look like they're wound backwards, even though they looked fine before. Okay, so I did have them wound correctly the first time. The question is, why am I not... Okay, for some reason we have this like little working area here. And nothing else. I'm just going to put that... Is it because it's colliding with trees? Okay, so the tree collision data clearly works. Because we are colliding with trees and not with the ground. For some reason, this mesh doesn't have collision data built. Which might be my last big thing for the night before I sign off. Because we've already done two pretty cool things in a fairly short period of time, right? It's only been an hour and a half. We've fixed up our terrain. I've messed up my hair. And, done three cool things today. And the sun's not even down yet. Yeah. I kind of hate to dive in on a bug at the last second, but I think this is one that I have to tackle. Otherwise, this is going to be a pain in the ass. Alright, how do we do this? How do we figure out what's wrong, even? This is something I hadn't really considered. Okay, so here's our add to mesh, and here's the function call where we actually generate the geometry. Don't care about the string innards, do care about this. Where we tell the geometry to update its boundaries. And it creates a sphere that now has a valid center and radius, and a bounding box that does the same. Okay. So that looks fine. And then we set our materials. And when we append the new subnode, we call preprocess. And here's our visibility and occlusion. The visibility and occlusion is fine, is the weird thing. It's an alpha tested material, so it needs to go into a certain render stage and a certain light stage. Get the geometry flags. Okay. Geometry render decal. It's definitely not a decal. We then set the render state, the shader flags, and the blend state. So it's rendering just fine. I'm looking for where it should set up the collision data specifically. Where does it build this system? Or where does it build, I should say, the details? So here's our preprocess inside the geometry object, and this is where I would expect it to be because this is where we stuffed all of our vertex data. So, okay, the object understands it's preprocessed. Buffer, vertex, geometry level. For each level, we get that. So this is where it builds all of the information that has to reside within the object itself, but I'm not seeing a like build collision data call or anything like that. And that's kind of the worrying part. That's what I'm hunting for and hoping to find. Position array bundle, primitive array. Like, it renders fine. Don't care about 90% of this. And then we invalidate the vertex data. And that's it. Update the transform, the post process, the visibility. And then we call is there like a build collision or a build collision oct tree? Close. Maybe what we're hunting for. Build collision data inside the geometry object. That might be what we're hunting for, that we aren't calling inside the terrain. Because I changed dramatically how the terrain system was being built. Before I was creating engine objects called a geometry vertex, and then I would take 3 of those and I would pack them into a geometry polygon object, and then I would take a bunch of these geometry polygons and I would pack those into a geometry surface, and then I would hand that geometry surface to a geometry object, and the geometry object would process all this data. And the problem is it was unifying a bunch of my vertices. Now I just directly inject all of my vertices and indices and normals and colors and all that shebang into the object directly, which might be why we're missing that data. So kind of the last step, geometry, get object, build collision data. Maybe this is what we're missing. I would be very happy if it was as simple as that. So it doesn't have an oct tree, and it doesn't have any kind of index array, and its exclusion mask is not exclude all. So now it's going to jump through some hoops, do a little bit of work, where it looks like it can create the oct tree size, compress it down. Okay, did that work? Specifically, yeah, it did. Oh my gosh, that's so much better. So we do have to turn off the tree's collision. That's kind of our last step here, which is easy. Whoops. Although I opened the wrong world file. We just jump into our model for the tree, and we say for these 2 nodes, both of them. Yes, render shadow, render with fog. Cube light projections eventually. Apply motion blur, don't really care to. I'll leave it on for now. Allow surface markings. Collision. Ah, there we go. Just turn off collision detection for everything. It does obstruct sight though. We want to leave that in. And it's kind of it. We're just going to rename these real quick. Tree trunk. Tree leaves. Just for making our life easier in the future, if we want to hunt one of these nodes down, we'll have a name that we can hunt down. Okay. So save to model. Yes. Done. Save the file and load her up. So now, yes, that's much better. Okay, good. Now I don't know where he's going. He's off on an adventure. But when he comes back, he should build stuff for us and then proceed to cut a bunch of trees down. What's funny, so I guess the things that make this tree look incorrect, the fact that this ground is so incredibly bright over here and that this snow is so incredibly white, are messing with the dynamics of everything else. Because it doesn't look quite so bad out here. It still looks noisy in comparison, But it doesn't look so bad, especially when you look at these shadows coming off of the tree. Now, the other thing to note is all the shadows are exactly the same. If we wanted to, we could go into our, let's see, spawn trees. We don't just want a random node position. We also set node rotation. No, just matrix 3D. Fine. And then we want a matrix 3D whose details are set by setting a rotation about, crap, it's X or Y. It's one of the, or no, sorry, no, it's set rotation about Z. My bad. And we have to set this to, can we just set it to an identity? I'd be really happy if we could. There we go. So we set it to the identity matrix. And then tree rotation, set rotation about Z. And we're just going to set it to a random value. A random float between 0 and 2 pi. Actually, haha, he has tau values in here. Ooh. Do we have a single tau value? No. Oh, we just have tau. Cool. And then obviously the tree rotation needs to get passed in here. So there we go. That should rotate all of our trees a certain amount. And that should make the shadows at least look ever so slightly different. Do they? Yeah, they do. They look slightly different. Cool. I'm happy with this. Obviously, we could do a little more. Do we want to do a little more tonight? We could. We have all these art assets. I kind of want to make use of some of these. At the same time, I have a bad feeling that if I jump into anything more tonight, it's going to turn into something huge, and I don't exactly have the time for something huge right now. You know what? As we near the 2-hour mark, I think I'm going to call it for tonight. It's been a good 2 hours. I'll take any questions for the next couple minutes before I log off. But thanks, guys, for joining me. We've started in on doing some extra art-based things. We'll probably jump in next on getting this terrain a little prettier in terms of art. We'll see if we can't get the ground to be a little more noisy, if only so that it doesn't look quite as ugly as this. At least so the contrast between art ground and trees doesn't look so absurd. Right? That's the reason this kind of looks ugly at the moment. And we can fix that next time. Yeah, that's kind of what I got. Either way, thanks again, everyone, for joining me. For those of you who are new here, who are curious what I'm up to, I'm making a survival RTS. The idea of the game being that you are helping a settlement of people survive in the world. It should be interesting when I get more gameplay put in. Vorska Bobble asking on whether I have any tips for streaming game development. Plan a lot beforehand. At least if you like my style of game development streaming, where I talk pretty constantly, you already have to have in your mind a to-do list of what you want to get done, so that even when you start to get distracted, you can kind of ring yourself back on course and get stuff done. Because making progress and the talking is really what pulls people in. Jimmy asking when I have if I have any idea when the public might be able to get their hands on my game. Gotta give me a little more time, Jimmy. Really not sure. I want to get a lot more gameplay in before I start handing out builds to people, because as it is right now, there's really nothing to captivate or hold the user in place. There's nothing terribly interesting going on here, and that's a problem. I need to fix that, apparently. So yeah, without any real gameplay mechanics, this is just kind of a pretty toy to play with, and it's not much better than Banished at that point. And I want to have this be, have there be more mechanics than Banished has, at bare minimum. So yeah, it might be a while. It'll probably be a long while, honestly. Where the heck did the little guy go? I saw him wander off. Oh, and then he proceeded to die over here, didn't he? Yeah, he ran out of health. Whoops. Oopsie daisies. We can just reload the world. And then quickly build something so he doesn't go too far. No, he's going anyway. Interesting to watch him traverse some of this terrain too. The routes he takes are not direct lines anymore. He's kind of bouncing around from place to place. It makes me wonder if my A-star is doing a good job or not, but at the same time he's avoiding the water. So at bare minimum, he's not doing anything stupid. Maybe next time we'll get trees of different types added in. Or the other thing we could do is get different trees in different biomes would be kind of cool. So we could have tree types, you know. Certain biomes, forests would have a lot of conifer trees versus deserts would have a palm tree here or there. And then we could have different ones up in the mountains. That would be kind of cool. Is he coming back ever? I'm looking around for him, but... oh, there he is. Oh, he does dip into the water from time to time. I don't quite know why. I need to figure that one out. I think it's because he walks too close to corners, and when he walks into a corner, he'll drop into it for just a heartbeat. He tends to avoid most water. He just doesn't dodge all of it perfectly. Vorska Bobble asks whether or not I make use of UML diagrams or anything similar. Not really. So I don't do UML diagrams. What I do tend to do is I tend to, if anything, I will scribble down just some very basic pseudocode more than anything else. Just say, this class needs to hold this information, and it needs to kind of converse with this class, and this class needs this kind of information out of it. So I'll do I wouldn't call them UML. UML is a very specific, guarded format that has its conventions and all kinds of stuff. I don't do that, but I do end up doing pseudocode for a lot of my stuff. So yes, there is some pseudocoded details in there. That is part of the research that I do kind of before stream, is I try and figure out basic class and code architecture so that when the time comes for me to code it up, I already know most of what I'm doing, hopefully. So guys, thanks again. If it is your first time here and you like what you see, or you like what I talk about, or you just want to learn stuff, or you want to help me learn stuff, it doesn't matter, hit the follow button below. I'm glad to have as many people following and helping out and seeing the game progress as possible. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining me tonight. Yeah, it is tonight. It's 6. This evening, I should say. Have a good rest of your day, and hopefully I'll see you on the next stream. Take care.